discuss in details. It's one of the most popular lasers, and I have had the good fortune of using a helium neon laser because these are not so costly, and you can readily order and buy them. The There are several other gas lasers like the carbon dioxide laser. Now, the carbon dioxide laser is a very powerful laser. I shall tell you more about it, but not in very great details because we just don't have the number of classes for discussing the carbon dioxide laser. The carbon dioxide laser is belongs to a class of lasers which are known as molecular gas lasers. Unlike the helium neon laser that we are going to discuss today, the molecular gas lasers make use of transitions between vibrational levels or vibration rotation levels of carbon dioxide molecule. Now, because the vibrational energies, as you probably already know from your molecular physics class, the vibrational energies are of the order of zero point 0.1 to 1 electron volt. Therefore, when transitions take place, the emitted photons have energy of the order of a fraction of an electron volt, maybe up to 1 electron volt or a little less than that, which means that the radiation emitted by molecular gas lasers fall in the infrared region. You cannot see uh, these laser beams or see objects illuminated by these laser beams because these are infrared beams. But at least the carbon dioxide laser is very, very popular in the industrial circles because you can have very, very powerful carbon dioxide lasers delivering, say, several kilowatts of energy. Unlike the helium neon laser, which delivers a few milliwatts of energy, the carbon dioxide laser can deliver several kilowatts of energy. And one more thing about carbon dioxide laser, it was invented by an Indian. You would be happy to know that the carbon dioxide laser was invented by an Indian whose name is Dr. C.K.N. Patel. He was working in the US at that time and he invented this laser, and it is one of the most useful lasers of all lasers. But we are not able to discuss the carbon dioxide laser in details because of lack of time or lack of number of available classes. So we begin the discussion of helium neon laser. Now, unlike the ruby laser or solid state lasers, the problem with gas lasers is that the energy levels of gas molecules or atoms are very narrow. Therefore, exciting a gas atom is a difficult task. You cannot usually excite a gas atom by uh, shining light on a system of atoms because because the the transition probabilities are very low, very small. In the case of solid state lasers, the uh, the energy levels form bands, so you don't have to worry about raising an atom from or ion like chromium from one particular level to another particular level. The, the transition takes the chromium to one of a very many large number of levels which form a band, and therefore you don't have to illuminate the ruby laser with a particular wavelength of light. A a broad spectrum light will also do, as we have already seen that ruby is excited by uh, light emitted by a xenon flash lamp. This cannot be done for gas lasers because the energy levels are very narrow, they don't form bands, and therefore to excite by shining light or illuminating the gas is very difficult because you have to have photons of precisely the energy, which is the energy difference between two levels of the uh, atoms in question, and therefore the cross section um, for excitation is very small. So gas lasers like helium neon lasers are excited electrically. The reason the here in helium neon laser, the uh, type of atom that actually emits the laser radiation is neon, but the helium is added to excite the neon atoms. Helium atoms can be readily excited electrically by bombarding them with electrons. And then these helium atoms can transfer their excitation energy to nitrogen to neon atoms, and then the subsequent transitions take place, and laser radiation is emitted. If you go to the next page, Surendra, move over to the next page. Surendra, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, move to the move to the next page.
सर मैंने कर दिया आई थिंक.
Yeah, I think he's in second phase, sir. Helium neon system. There is.
हाँ कर चुका हूँ मैं पहले कर दिया
Yeah,
सर.
yeah. He's in 112 phase, sir.
ये ना कर दिया.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
सर ये जो न्यू बुक है उसका हम लोगों ने पीडीएफ बना लिया था इस बार न्यू एडिशन का.
हाँ ठीक है, बट कैन यू
न्यूट्रल एटम
ओके
गैस लेजर हीलियम नियॉन लेजर सर 8.1
yes
8.1.
which book is this? Is it Lord's book or somebody else's book?
नहीं सर लोड्स बुक है.
Book, but the new edition book, which Shikshan
Edition. Okay.
got.
So show me the. Uh, I cannot just scroll down because I cannot see the whole page.
ओके सर ओके. सर कैन यू एक 1 सेकंड सर.
See, can you not show the pages that I had?
ओके
Okay,
ओके.
this is a diff. Yeah, okay. This will do. That figure will do. Okay.
ओके
Scroll upwards. Scroll up. Yeah.
राइट सर.
No. I still can't see. If you move upwards, I cannot see the figure.
ओके
Yeah,
ओके.
this is okay.
वन सर.
Okay, fine. So in helium neon laser, you have
सर दिस पेज ना.
a gas mixture comprising of helium and neon gases, and uh,
Please zoom
the
in.
gases are,
Sundara.
yeah, I can see clearly. No issues. Yeah, I can see clearly.
Yes, sir. Please continue.
So yeah. So notice that helium and neon are both inert gases, right? So a mixture of helium and neon will remain the same mixture of helium and neon because these are inert gases. Now, as I said, helium is not the type of atom that emits the laser radiation. It is neon which does the trick. However, you need helium to excite the neon atoms. Helium can be easily excited by bombarding them with uh, helium atoms can be easily excited by bombarding them with um, electrons. In other words, if a flow of electrons is maintained through the gas mixture, that is, an electric current is passed through the gas mixture, then helium atoms are raised from their ground state to excited levels. Now, recall that helium ground state configuration is 1s2, as you know very well. So, the first two excited states of helium correspond to the configurations 1s1, 2s1. Okay? And now this uh, configuration 1s1, 2s1 has uh, two possible angular momenta. In one case, the total angular momentum of the system is equal to 1, and in the other case, the total angular momentum of the system is 0. The level with angular momentum 0 is denoted as 21s0. Can you see it in the diagram?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Anyway, doesn't matter. The one with angular momentum 0 carries a superscript 1 because it is just the old notation that a level is denoted as 2j plus 1, capital L, then j. So when j is 0, 2j plus 1 is 1. So 1 capital S means the value of capital L. So 1 followed by capital S represents the state when the total angular momentum of the system is 0. On the other hand, the 3s state represents uh, the configuration in which the total angular momentum of the system is 1 and 2j plus 1 is 3. So 3s means the angular momentum of the system is 1. System means system comprising of two electrons, one electron in the 1s level, the other electron in the 2s level. So helium can be excited to uh, this 1s and 3s states. Okay, and you can roughly calculate the excitation energies. How can you calculate the excitation energies? You can firstly imagine that the helium atom is like a hydrogen atom, except that the effective charge of the nucleus is not 2 but 1. One electron is lifted from 1s level to 2s level. The other electron remains in the 1s level, which is close to the nucleus, that comprises of two protons and two neutrons in helium. So you can imagine that this nucleus together with the electron that has uh, remained back in the 1s state comprises an effective nucleus having a charge of 1, 2 minus 1. So then you would expect that the energies of the electron that has been excited to a state can be calculated using Balmer series formula or Bohr's formula. That way, you would be expecting energies of the order of something like, sorry, what has happened? Anyway, I can see the figure again. Something has just scroll up. Yeah, yeah.
Move scroll.
Scroll up, scroll up. Yeah, yeah. Leave it, leave it, leave it. So you'd expect that the energies of the two 1s and two 3s levels would be something like 10 eV or something, because the energy of the hydrogen atom, when it is excited, when the electron is excited to the 2s state, is about uh, 13.6 into 3 by 4. So something like 10 electron volts. Actually, the energy of the 3s level in helium is 19 point something like 7 eV, whereas uh, the energy of the electron in the 1s state is 20.5 eV. The difference comes in because the shielding of the nucleus by the electron that has remained back in the 1s level is not complete. So when I say that the effective charge is 1, that is 2 minus 1, it is not exactly right. The shielding is only partially effective. So the effective charge is something like 1.3 or something. So in Balmer's formula, if you replace z equal to um, 1 by z equal to 1.3, then you know that in that formula z appears as z square. So the energy is to be multiplied by a factor like 1.3 whole square, that is around 1.7. So that way, the energy of the electron that has been raised to the 2,1s or 2,3s level becomes 1.7 or 1.8 times the energy that you would have for the corresponding hydrogen atom. This is the way to explain it. This is something that you should, or you have already been taught, that how to calculate the energies of electrons having electrons in atoms having values of z larger than 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. There you have to take into account the shielding effect of the electrons which have remained in their original orbits to calculate the energies of the uh, energy levels of the electron which has been excited. Anyway, so helium atom is excited either to 1s or to 3s level. Now here comes the neon atom. Neon atoms which are moving around thermally uh, along with the helium atoms sometimes collide with the helium atoms. It so happens that two levels of the neon atom, namely the two levels denoted by two small s and three small s levels, have almost the same excitation energy as the uh, respectively uh, one capital S and three capital S levels of the helium atom. As you can see in the diagram, the two small s and three small s levels of neon atom are both uh, having many sub-levels. As you can see in the diagram, they are showing several sub-levels. Actually, there are four sub-levels corresponding to each of these. They have also shown that these four sub-levels. Uh, now, before going into what happens when a collision between an excited helium atom and a neon atom in the ground state takes place, let us uh, try to simplify things. You see, the one smallest level of neon is actually the level having the electronic configuration 1s2 2p5 3s1. In the ground state, the electronic configuration of neon is 1s2 2s2 2p6. If you lift one of the electrons in the 2p level to the next higher level, that is the 3s level, Then you have the electronic configuration 1 is to 2p5, 1 is to 2 is to 2p5, 3s1. So yeah, it is shown here. So 1s band corresponds to, we haven't written the part that precedes 2p5. It is 1 is to 2s2, 2p5, 3s. Similarly, 2s is 1 is to 2s to 2p5, 4s, and 3s is 1 is to 2s to 2p5, 5s. And then you have the corresponding levels where an electron is excited to 3p and 4p levels. These are denoted by different symbols in the diagram. Go back to the diagram. Go back to figure 8.1.
Yes, sir.
He
Yes.
Advantage.
So as you can see from the diagram, the two smallest level is almost at the same level as the 3 capital S level of helium. Similarly, the 3 smallest level of neon, which has the electronic configuration 1 is to 2 is to 2p5, 5s, is almost at the same level as the 1 capital S level of helium. So what happens is that when a neon atom in the ground state collides with a helium atom which has been excited to the 1 capital S level, energy is transferred from helium to neon quite easily. This is known as resonance transfer of energy. Because the energy levels match so closely, energy is easily transferred from the excited atom to the unexcited atom, and this type of transfer is known as resonance transfer. So resonance transfer of energy takes place from helium to neon, both corresponding to the upper two uh, pairs as well as the lower two pairs, that is 1s and 3s pair, and 3 capital S to 2 smallest pair. So at this point, let us recall that we have discussed two basic type of uh, energy level diagrams in connection with lasers. One is the 3-level diagram, the other one is the 4-level diagram. For Ruby, the 3-level diagram is appropriate, as we have seen. Ruby laser is basically uh, a 3-level system, whereas the helium neon laser is basically a 4-level system. So the ground state, where both helium and neon are in their ground states, helium in the diagram, as you can see, helium in one capital S state, and neon state has not been shown, but neon's ground state is 1 is to 2 is to 2p6. So in the ground state of the whole system, both of the both types of atoms are in their ground states. Then helium is excited. So the system goes to level 4. The excited state of helium represents level 4 in the 4-level diagram. Then there is resonance transfer of energy. No emission of radiation. It is a non-radiative transition. So when neon is excited, the system is going from 4 to 3, level 4 to level 3, because as we know, in a 4-level diagram, the level 3 is populated via non-radiative transition from level 4. So here we see that level 1s of helium is one of the possible level 4s, and then by a non-radiative transition, the level 3 is populated, which in this case corresponds to 3 smallest level of neon. On the other hand, if we consider one capital S level of helium to be level 4, then the corresponding level 3 is 2 small s level of neon. So that is how the system is transiting from level 4 to level 3. Now, as we know, in a 4-level system, lasing action takes place between level 4 and level 3 and level 2. So here is how it takes place. You see the positions of the levels 3p and 2p. The 2p level corresponds to the electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p5, 3p. So the 2p level corresponds to the electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p5, 3p. This lies above the 1 small s level, which corresponds to 1s2, 2s2, 2p5, 3s. Similarly, the 3p level of neon corresponds to the electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p5, 4p, which lies above the 2 smallest level of neon but lies below the 3 smallest level of neon. From 3 smallest level of neon, which actually comprises of 4 sublevels, transitions can take place to either 3p level of neon, which comprises of 10 sublevels, or to 2p level of neon, which comprises of again 10 sublevels. So there are very closely spaced sublevels. We need not worry about the energy differences between them. We can treat them as single levels. So in such transitions, radiation is emitted. So the transition, the the transfer of energy from helium to neon takes place non-radiatively, whereas when neon decays from 3s or from 2s level, the transition takes place radiatively. When the neon atom arrives in level 2p, it rapidly decays to level 1s, and this is via spontaneous emission. The half-life for level 2p to decay to level 1s is uh, only about 10 to the power minus 9 seconds or so. So it is very fast. So this is relaxation via spontaneous emission, uh, because spontaneous emission is highly favored. The half-life or the mean life of the 2s level of neon towards decay to 1s level is very short. Okay, and hello.
Surrender, plug in your charge, I think.
Okay.
Yes, Bhavan here.
Are you plugging in your charging or something like that?
हाँ मैं चार्ज लगा रहा था अभी रुक जा
अच्छा, अभी प्रेजेंट हो रहा है, आई मीन
हाँ हो रहा है
Yeah,
ओके ओके सर नो प्रॉब्लम
ओके सर, प्लीज कंटिन्यू.
okay. So as we know, for 4-level systems, the requirement is that the mean life of level 3 towards decay to level 2, which is denoted as tau 32, should be larger or much larger than the mean life of level 2 to decay into level 1, which is tau 21. You require tau 32 to be much larger than tau 21 for lasing action of the 4-level system. Now here level 3 is either the 2s level or the 3s level of neon, whereas level 2 is either 3p or 2p level of neon. The mean life of the 3s or the 2s level is around 100 nanoseconds. Well, actually, as we shall see later, this mean life is around 700 nanoseconds, but that is a different thing. Point is, it is few hundred nanoseconds, whereas the lifetime of the 2p state is only a uh, few nanoseconds, a few tens of nanoseconds, that is 10 minus 8 seconds or so. So the condition tau 32 larger than or much larger than tau 21 is satisfied. Thus, lasing action can take place between levels 2s and 2p or levels 3s and 3p or 2p. Finally, the system arrives at level 1s of neon, which has the electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p5, 3s1. From that level, that is the 1s level of neon, neon atoms drop down to the ground state via a non-radiative process. Specifically, it is mentioned in the figure via collision with the walls of the discharge tube in which the gas is taken. So that is the whole story. Now, you may say that then this is a 5-level system at least, because you have these levels of helium which I have uh, identified with level 4. Then you have the 2s, 3s levels of neon which I have identified with level 3. Then I have the 3p and 2p levels of neon which I have identified with level 2. Then they come down to level 1s and then finally to ground state. So you'd say it's a 5-level system. But the transition from 1s to the ground state takes place via collision with the walls, and the energy difference is very small. So 1s level is uh, clubbed together with the ground state as level 1. So in this way, the helium neon system is a prototype of 4-level systems. We know that 4-level systems are much more efficient than 3-level systems in the sense that the amount of energy required to produce population difference between level 3 and level 2 is much less than the amount of energy that you have to spend to produce population difference between level 2 and level 1 in the 3-level system. So 4-level systems are much more energy efficient. In fact, the population difference required in accordance with the formula Shallow and Townes in the case of helium neon laser is much less than the population difference that you require for ruby laser, that we shall also see. So skipping some details that are given after equation 8.1, you just scroll down, scroll down, go to next page. Hello, Surendra, scroll down.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
The systematic diagram.
Living, yeah, helium laser.
Yeah.
सर एक मैं फुल एक्सप्लेन कर रहा हूँ एक बार, आप बता दीजिए। मे बी सर इसमें प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है न्यू एडिशन में।
यस,
नेक्स्ट टाइम सर वही
नहीं ठीक है, ओके ओके, इट इज ओके।
ये वाला पेज ना सर,
थोड़ा थोड़ा ऊपर उठाना, हाँ, वो पेज के ऊपर का हिस्सा
ये वाला
दिखाई नहीं दे रहा है। Yes, I want to see this page, but the upper portion of the page is not shown in the screen.
ओके ओके ओके
Just scroll up slightly, scroll up.
सर आप ठीक है?
So there is some problem in scrolling up. Okay, the upper portion is still not visible, but I will tell you what the upper portion tells. It says that the helium and neon gases have to be taken in suitable proportions. Like there should be more helium gas than neon gas. The partial pressures of helium and neon should be as 10:1. They have given specific examples, like the pressure of neon gas can be 0.1 torr, while that of helium gas can be 1 torr. Remember that 1 torr means 1 millimeter of mercury. So the pressure of helium is to be something like 1 torr or 1 millimeter of mercury, whereas that of neon should be around 0.1 torr or 0.1 millimeter of mercury. This kind of pressure ratio is required so that there is no back transfer of energy from neon to helium. It is always possible that an excited neon atom can, say one that has been raised to the 3 smallest level, can transfer its energy back to helium to excite it to 1 capital S level. What had happened is that helium was, say, excited to 1 capital S level, then it collided with a neon atom in the ground state, lifted the neon atom to the 3 smallest level. In the process itself got de-excited and dropped down to the ground state. Now what can happen is that that neon atom in the 3 smallest level can collide with a helium atom in the ground state, excite it to 1 capital S level, and itself go down to the ground state. You don't want that, because that means that your level 3 is getting depopulated. But you want population inversion with respect to levels 3 and 2. So you want as many neon atoms in levels 3s and 2s as possible. This means you don't want such radiationless transfers from neon to helium. If you take much more helium than neon, then there would be many more helium atoms which would be in the excited states than neon atoms, and therefore possibility of helium getting excited is much less, because helium is already excited. So that is why you take helium in much greater proportion than neon. The pressure ratio is kept as 10:1 for that purpose. Now, the inventors of this laser, who are Yavan et al., just leave it there, Yavan et al., initially no wait, go to the diagram number 8.2. Don't change the page. Yeah, here. Okay.
Yes.
Now this is the device invented by Yavan et al., Javan, Yavan et al. It comprises of a quartz tube 80 centimeters long. The quartz tube had a diameter of 1.5 centimeter, as you can see in the diagram, and there are electrodes attached to the quartz tube. There are 3 electrodes, as you can see. The central one is attached to a source of electrical signal which had a frequency of 28 megahertz or megacycles per second. So this is a very high frequency oscillator which feeds signal to the central electrode as well as the two outlying electrodes. So because of the appearance of electric field between the outlying electrodes and the central electrode, a current flows, and this current excites the helium atoms to states 1 capital S and 3 capital S, and then the subsequent collisions and transfers of energy and de-excitation, etc. Now, to the left of the tube and also to the right of the tube, you can see two bellows. Now, I don't know whether you have seen bellows. Bellows used to be uh, fitted to old-fashioned cameras. If you have seen very old-fashioned cameras that were used in the early 20th century, maybe you have seen some photographs of this. They had bellows. Bellows means some sort of uh, foldings which allowed the camera lens to be pushed near the film or drawn away from the film. The bellows allow the uh, lens of the camera to focus the image on the film. That is how the old fashioned cameras functioned. Nowadays, things are done electronically, this focusing business. Also, you can do it manually with some high end cameras like those provided by Minolta or Canon and so on. But in uh, uh, autofocus cameras, the focusing is done electronically. But here, uh, the focusing is uh, it's not exactly focusing. What the bellows function is like, you can change the distance between the reflecting plates. There is a reflecting plate to the left, and there is also a similar reflecting plate to the right of the tube. These two reflecting plates are movable because of the bellows. Uh, can you do you understand what a bellow is? Have you seen harmonium?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You have seen harmonium. Yeah, the harmonium has bellows. The harmonium player constantly pushes and pushes out and pulls in the a strip with holes so that air is drawn into the harmonium box, or uh, air is let out. Right? You have seen it, right?
Yes. Many
So
times.
the
Yes, sir.
harmonium has bellows, or folded sort of uh, uh, cloth, or some sort of elastic membrane with which can be extended or compressed. So bellows are like that. So, these are provided so that you can uh, make the separation between the reflecting plates exactly equal to 100 centimeters. So there are also leveling screws. You have not have you performed the experiment with Michelson's interferometer in your
Yes.
SEM
Not
2?
in SEM one we did, I think. Yes.
You did it in SEM 1, right? So as in Michelson's interferometer, there are also leveling screws at the backs of the reflecting plates so that you can precisely orient these reflecting plates so that they are exactly parallel to each other. In fact, the parallelism is within about 1 second. What is 1 second of angle? 1 second of angle is 1/60th of a minute of angle. That means 1 by 3600 degree. And 1 degree is equal to 1 by
Signal time.
57.5 radians.
Yes, yes.
So you can see that if you can make them parallel to within a few seconds, the uh, angle between the planes of the two reflecting plates is of the order of a very small fraction of a milliradian. So you can make them as parallel as that using the leveling screws. Following these reflecting plates, you have a pair of windows which again comprise of highly polished glass plates, uh, and through one of which the laser beam comes out. So let us say the right hand window is the window through which the laser beam comes out. Then you have to make the left hand, you have to cover the, if necessary, the outside of the left hand window with, say, deposition of silver or something. But that is not the thing of importance. The importance is that this reflecting plate actually comprises of several layers of dielectric. I think the original uh, inventors of the helium neon laser used 13 layers of dielectric material to achieve a reflectivity of almost 99%. So now, with that, and uh, having already seen the energy level diagram of the helium neon laser system, you can see that laser radiations of many different wavelengths are uh, producible. For example, in the transition from 3 small s to 3p levels, uh, the laser radiation that you can have has wavelength of 3.39 micrometers. Again, in the transition from 3s to 2p level, you have laser radiation of 3000, laser radiation of 6328 angstroms. And in the transition from 2 small s to 2 small p levels, you again have radiation of wavelength 1.15 micrometers. So this 3.39 micrometer and 1.15 micrometer radiations fall in the infrared region, whereas the 6328 angstrom radiation falls in the visible region. It is red in color, not as red as the laser radiation that you obtain from ruby, which has wavelength of 6943 or 6928 angstroms, but still it is red. It falls in the red region. This 6328 angstrom radiation from helium neon laser is one of the most popular laser radiations. It is used in uh, MSc laboratories and other teaching laboratories all over the world. As far as teaching laboratories are concerned, the 6328 angstrom radiation from helium is the most popular. Helium neon laser is the most popular uh, laser radiation. So as I said, had the good fortune uh, of seeing that sort of laser and using that also for some experiments. Of course, at the postgraduate level. That was elsewhere. In Bose Institute, you don't have that laser. So in Bose Institute, we have only semiconductor lasers in the MSc lab, and then in the photonics lab uh, under Professor Shomshubro Bandyopadhyay, there is a much more sophisticated laser, but I don't think you will have uh, the good fortune of uh, seeing or using it. Anyway, the helium neon laser that was invented by Yavan et al. Has this kind of structure. The whole thing was, as you can see, 100 centimeters plus in length. So that is quite a big system. But it is not as big as the carbon dioxide lasers, which can occupy a whole room. A carbon dioxide laser can be as long as 5 meters in length. The tube used in, and also dioxide laser, you can get laser radiation of uh, 15 kilowatt power or even more. So that's a very powerful laser. Helium neon lasers are only able to deliver powers of the order of a milliwatt, a few milliwatts. But the helium neon laser has one very good feature, namely that it's almost monochromatic. Because it's a gas laser, the spread in wavelength is mainly due to Doppler effect. And as we shall see, the spread in wavelength or frequency is much less than what you had for ruby laser. But to continue with this helium neon laser system, let us move on to the next page. Go to the next page.
Surendra, move to next page.
By the way, Javan et al. Initially experimented with the 1.15 micrometer radiation, which is in the infrared region, and they found very many interesting things regarding the various wavelengths which lie close to the 1.15 micrometer. Because as I said, the levels 2p and 3p as well as 2s and 3s have many sublevels. So when transitions between sublevels take place, you have radiations having slightly different frequencies. So that is why, as you can see in the book, along with 1.15 micrometer, there are other radiations of slightly different wavelengths. We'll not go into that. Now, what you see in figure 8.3 is a modern type of helium neon laser. It's much more compact, much smaller. The one that I had the opportunity to use had a length of around 50 centimeters. So this was much smaller than the original laser of Yavan. Such kind of lasers have a structure shown in figure 8.3. So here discharge is produced by exciting the gas by a DC source of power, not a high frequency AC source. As you can see, there is a DC source of power and there are only two electrodes. So the tube was not closed by two reflecting plates covered with dielectric layers. The tube was closed by two Brewster windows. I will tell you what Brewster windows are. But reflection is produced not by Brewster windows. Reflection is actually produced by two, as you can see, spherical mirrors which are placed in confocal configuration. I have told you about confocal configurations. Confocal configuration means a pair of spherical mirrors whose focal points lie at the middle point between them. So in this particular case, the middle point lies at the center of the discharge tube. So because spherical mirrors have focal lengths equal to half their radii, which means that each uh, spherical lens has a radius equal to the separation of that spherical mirror from the other spherical mirror. The separation between the two spherical mirrors is equal to their radius of curvature. And the focal length is half of that. That is, the focal length is equal to separation between the spherical mirror and the center of the discharge tube. So that configuration, that sort of configuration is called a confocal configuration or confocal mirror system. So reflection is produced by confocal mirror system. The advantage is that you don't have to make them exactly parallel to each other. The light is reflected back into the discharge tube so that this stimulated emission can take place very effectively. For if you had exactly parallel mirrors, flat parallel mirrors, then a ray which travels even at a very small angle to the axis and falls on one of the mirrors will get reflected and move further away from the axis and be lost. In confocal system, a ray which travels slightly obliquely to the axis is still reflected back into the discharge tube or the lasing system, and it can produce further stimulated emissions. So the confocal system is much more efficient. Now, what are Brewster windows? I don't think you have performed the experiment that we had planned to let you perform involving polarization of light. Now, Brewster window comes up in connection with the theory of polarization of light. It's like this. It's a flat piece of transparent dielectric, like a flat piece of glass, and suppose light falls on it at some angle. Suppose the incident light is unpolarized. Then
Sorry, your voice is not coming.
the
Sir, your voice is cutting, sir.
reflected
Hello, sir.
light will in general
Sir, your voice is cutting.
be partially polarized. Suppose the axis of the system. Sorry, this is not clear.
Yes, sir, your voice is
Hello?
cutting regularly.
Hello?
Yes, sir, your voice is cutting
Let
regularly.
me remove the. Okay, let me try by removing the headphone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is it clear now?
Yes, sir, it is clear
Is
now.
it better now?
Yes, sir, it is better.
Okay, so headphone was giving some trouble probably. What I am saying is that suppose you have a slab of glass, say, small slab of glass. That means glass whose surface is flat. Now, if a beam of light falls on such a slab, then part of it is reflected, part of it is transmitted. Now, if the incident beam is unpolarized, then the reflected light will be partially polarized. And the transmitted light will also be partially polarized. Now, if the angle of incidence equals a particular angle known as the Brewster angle and whose value theta b is given by the equation tan theta b equal to eta. Remember that in Lord's book, eta represents the refractive index. So if the refractive index of the glass slab be eta for that particular beam or for that particular wavelength of light, then if the angle of incidence satisfies the equation tan theta b equal to eta, then the reflected light will be fully polarized. It will be a fully linearly polarized light. What sort of polarization? Consider the plane defined by the incident ray and the normal to the slab of glass. This defines a plane. This is known as the plane of incidence. So if now you look at the reflected light will be polarized perpendicular to that plane of incidence, which means that if the plane of incidence is the xz plane, then the reflected light will have electric vector lying in the y direction. You see, the electric vector will be perpendicular to the plane of incidence, which may be, as I said, the xz plane. So if the angle of incidence equals the Brewster angle, which is given by that equation number 8.3, then the reflected light will be fully polarized such that the electric vector is perpendicular to the plane of incidence. The transmitted light will be partially polarized, which means that there would be a component of the electric field in the plane of incidence as well as a component perpendicular to the plane of incidence. So such partially polarized light then falls on the spherical mirror and gets reflected from there, and then again passes through the slab of glass or the Brewster window in this particular case. As it passes through the Brewster window again a portion of the light which is polarized perpendicular to the plane of incidence is reflected away, and what comes out of the Brewster window is an even more uh, partially polarized light with the electric vector in the plane of incidence larger than the electric vector perpendicular to the plane of incidence. As it goes to the right, say, and passes through another Brewster window, the same thing happens. Gradually, the component perpendicular to the plane of incidence gets reduced, and ultimately, after several reflections, the light that remains is almost completely polarized in the plane of incidence. So this is a nice way of not only keeping the beam of light within the lasing system, it also manages to produce polarized light. The light that comes out from this system as laser beam, which you can use for other experiment, is polarized light, polarized in the plane of incidence. It's a beautiful idea by which you can produce polarized light. Remember, however, that while the light that is uh, reflected by the Brewster windows is fully polarized perpendicular to the plane of incidence, the light that comes out in the form of laser beam is not 100% polarized in the plane of incidence. The degree of polarization is given by a formula known as Provost-Desai's formula, and in the experiment that we plan to um, have you uh, perform in the laboratory was partly a verification of in the purpose of that experiment was partly to verify the Provost-Desai formula, but I don't know whether it would be possible for you to do this experiment during semester 4. So if you can find time, you at least perform the experiment related to polarization of light. So basically what comes out as laser beam in this system is a polarized beam of light, plane of polarization being in the plane of incidence, that contains the normal to the Brewster window and the axis of the tube. So that is the modern type of uh, helium neon laser. Now if you scroll down, let's scroll down further. Here they say that the 6328 angstrom helium neon laser is one of the most popular and most widely used lasers that I have already told you. And okay, as also you can see written there the amount of input power, you have a battery and or otherwise uh, an oscillator, say of 28 megahertz frequency, which supplies electrical power to the discharge tube. The electrical power supplied um, in the original model of Javan et al. Was 50 watt, but in modern small size helium neon lasers, it's around 5 to 10 watts as written there, but the output power is of the order of a few milliwatts only. So it is not a very powerful laser, but because of its purity, that means that because the monochromaticity is quite high, you can use this for many sophisticated experiments. Okay, now if we move further, scroll downwards, you can see an arrangement where they are saying how to separate the various components of the laser radiation. As we have already seen, because the 3s and 3p as well as 2s and 2p levels of neon comprise of many sub-levels, so many different uh, types of laser radiations are possible. Right? If you want to have one particular, say you want the 6328 angstrom radiation, so uh, because it is in the optical range, you can easily bring it out. But if you want to separate between the various uh, components that lie in the infrared region, that is, those which have wavelengths of the order of 1.15 to 3.39 micrometers, you can separate them using a suitable prism. A prism produces dispersion, and by placing the mirror in such a way that one particular wavelength of light is reflected back towards where it came from, that is, to place the mirror in such a way that that um, component of light or radiation um, falls on the mirror normally, then the mirror will reflect it back and it will return to the discharge tube. Whereas any other component which will fall on the mirror at some angle, not normally, and it will be reflected away from the uh, original direction of incidence, and it will be removed from uh, the beam. So this is one way of uh, making the radiation uh, more pure by selectively reflecting one particular component and uh, reflecting away the other components. So this is one method, but let us move on. This is not a critical thing. Let's move on. Here they are giving details. Yes. So uh, as we have seen, there are three main broadening mechanisms: the natural broadening, the collision broadening, and the Doppler broadening. As you can see, and the Doppler broadening is, of course, mostly important for gas lasers. So the Doppler broadening produces a widening of the line, the emitted line, to an extent of 1300 megahertz, typically at 1000 degree Kelvin. That we have already seen in connection with the discussion on broadening mechanisms. So for gas lasers, obviously the most important broadening mechanism is the Doppler broadening mechanism. This 1300 megahertz is valid for 6328 angstrom, that is the uh, helium neon laser radiation of interest to us. Now we move on to resonators, because as we have seen, a tube with reflecting end plates serves like a open resonator, and such a resonator can support only certain wavelengths of light or radiation. These are given by the formula that the allowed frequency is, if it is nu, then nu is equal to CQ by 2L. So this means that the separation between successive allowed frequencies C by 2L. So if L is equal to 100 centimeters, as in the original instrument of Javan et al., the difference of frequency is 150 megahertz. Now, if the half width of the emitted line is 1300 megahertz due to Doppler broadening, then how many modes will be supported by this resonator? Because the separation between successive modes is 150 megahertz, you can see that at least 8 different modes will be supported. You divide 1300 by 150 and you get something like 8 point something. That means 8 different modes will be supported by this resonator. So the output can have 8 different wavelengths, because 8 different wavelengths can be supported by these resonators. As you can see in the diagram, they are showing 8 to 9 spikes within the wide envelope. Now, out of this, if you refer back to the formula of Towns and Schwallow, then you can see that population inversion is most readily achieved for the wavelength of frequency for which G omega is maximum. In other words, if G omega is large, then the required population difference or for sustained lasing action is less. Now, because the central 1 or 2 spikes out of the 8 or 9 spikes shown in figure 8.5, the central spikes have the largest values of G omega. So laser radiation corresponding to these wavelengths will most readily and likely be produced, because the population difference required for sustained lasing action for this particular frequency of pair of frequencies is least. So you can achieve such population difference with less input power, and therefore it is most likely that the emitted radiation will have a frequency corresponding to the central spike or central pair of spikes. And this is shown here. They have indicated, they have clearly indicated that one of the central spikes is the one that is to be associated with the laser radiation, as you can see from that figure. Okay. So once again, although 8 different modes are supported by the resonator within the envelope that results from Doppler broadening, the one having the largest value of G omega is the one which is likely to actually, if you can say, win the competition among the various modes and come out in the form of the laser beam. So they show that by writing laser line beside one of these central frequencies. Okay. Now, finally, they give some data. There you can see that for the 6328 angstrom radiation or laser beam produced by the helium neon laser, which has a frequency of 4.74 into 10 to the power 14 hertz. Remember one thing, and this may be useful in in your future uh, selection tests or something, that optical radiations have frequencies of the order of 3 to 6 into 10 to the power 14 hertz. Optical radiations have frequencies lying between 3 and 6 into 10 to the power 14 hertz. And uh, obviously 4.74 is included in that range. Now, for the width of the uh, frequency spectrum, they have used delta news. It should not be nu zero, it should be delta nu equal to 1300 megahertz. That we already know because the broadening is produced by Doppler broadening mechanism. So it is 1300 megahertz. And the mean life of level 3, which is either level 3s or 2s, is 7 into 10 minus 7. 10 minus 7 second means 100 nanoseconds. So the mean life is 700 nanoseconds, and tau p, which is the average amount of time that a photon spends within the resonator, is 10 to the power minus 7 seconds, that is 100 nanoseconds. With all this data put in Swallow-Towns equation, if you put this data in Swallow-Towns equation, then you will find that the population difference required for sustained lasing action is 3 into 10 to the power 9 per cubic centimeter. And this is much less than the few times 10 to the power 16 per cubic centimeter required for the ruby laser. If you remember the population difference that was necessary in the case of ruby laser, you will recall that that was something like some 3 or 4 into 10 to the power 16 per cubic centimeter, whereas for the helium neon laser it's only 10 to the power 9 per cubic centimeter. So such population difference can be much more easily achieved using much less input power, and that is why these gas lasers are much more power efficient. Okay, I think I have covered the helium neon laser, and I will stop at this point. Okay, and if you I would strongly suggest that you read up by yourself the carbon dioxide laser, which is also uh, uh, given in this chapter of Lord's book. The carbon dioxide laser, as I said, is a molecular gas laser, and the levels involved in this molecular gas laser are vibration rotation levels of carbon dioxide molecule, as well as uh, you need an additional gas, namely nitrogen, in order to excite the carbon dioxide molecules. Just like you needed helium to excite neon, in the carbon dioxide laser, you need nitrogen molecules to excite the carbon dioxide molecules. So just read up. It's quite an interesting type of laser. Interesting also because carbon dioxide laser was invented by an Indian, as I said, Dr. C.K.N. Patel. So you would be proud to know that and read about his invention. But we just don't have enough time to discuss all the different types of lasers. So as far as gas lasers are concerned, I have discussed the helium neon laser, and next we shall move on to semiconductor lasers. So thank you so much, and just a final word that next Thursday, that is 31st of December, I have to coordinate a webinar from 11:30 a.m. to at least 1:30 p.m. So I cannot take the class on next Thursday, and we shall decide when we can take that class. Okay. So, thank you so much.
सर वन क्वेश्चन
Yeah, yeah,
सर अपन पंपिंग प्रोसेस के लिए डिफरेंट करते हैं कि ऑप्टिकल पंपिंग इलेक्ट्रिकल पंपिंग राइट केमिकल पंपिंग
हाँ,
तो सर ये किस बात पे डिपेंड करता है कि अपन जैसे डिफरेंट है सॉलिड लेजर है जैसे
yeah,
सेमीकंडक्टर लेजर है या गैस लेजर है तो अपन
हाँ,
उसमें कौन सा पंपिंग यूज करेंगे कि अपना पॉपुलेशन इन्वर्जन अपन को मिल जाए मतलब
As far as transparent solids are concerned, transparent solids like ruby
यस सर
can produce population inversion, or you can excite uh, the relevant ion or atom by shining light, broadband uh, uh, light on such crystal. Because they are transparent, the light will enter the crystal and manage to excite the uh, atom or ion relevant to lasing action. As far as semiconductor lasers are concerned, because they are not transparent, you cannot excite them by shining light on them. Semiconductor lasers are excited electrically, as we shall learn in our next class. As far as gas lasers are concerned, because the energy levels of gas atoms or molecules are very sharp, uh, probably we'll say that as far as molecular lasers are concerned, the energy levels are not that sharp, because you have these bands of rotational motions associated with vibrational levels and so on. But nevertheless, in gaseous systems, the chosen method of excitation is electrical excitation. Optical excitation for neutral gas lasers like helium neon lasers is very inefficient, because the atomic levels are levels of neutral atoms or inert gas atoms are very sharp, and to excite uh, such atoms to higher energy levels, you require a beam of light of precisely the wavelength which is absorbed by such atoms. Otherwise, you cannot excite the neutral gas atoms or inert gas atoms. So now, to have a source of light which produces a light of wavelength that perfectly matches the, or almost perfectly matches the uh, the wavelength that is emitted by such neutral or inert gas atoms when they jump back from excited state to ground state. Or in other words, to have a source of light which produces photons having energy exactly equal to the energy difference between the ground state and the excited state of a neutral gas atom is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Out of so many atoms and so many systems and so many types of sources of light, to find one source which produces radiation of that particular wavelength and in sufficient intensity is very difficult. As you will see at the beginning of this chapter on gas lasers, the author has mentioned one type of gas laser, namely cesium laser, cesium gas laser, for which optical excitation was possible because a particular emission line of helium atoms matches with a certain transition of cesium atoms. But that's just one system for which this has worked. So for gas lasers, excitation by optical means is not a very efficient or uh, preferable system. So for gases, electrical excitation is the chosen system. There are systems which can be excited by chemical reactions. Chemical reactions also result in transfer of energies, and so there are systems which can be excited by um, having chemical reactions within the system. There are systems which can be excited by, for example, something like exploding a bomb within the system. The shock wave produced by the bomb can compress the gas and produce excitation. But these are not very convenient means of excitation. Electrical and optical excitations are much more convenient. So we'll not go and discuss this chemical excitation uh, or this shockwave excitations of system. Okay.
Okay.